The restaurant was busy in the way most city restaurants are on a Friday evening. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just full. Plates moved. Conversations overlapped. A birthday candle flickered at one table. At another, a couple sat in careful silence. Emily was halfway through her shift. Her feet ached, and she was trying to remember which table had asked for extra lemons. She was not glowing with saint-like patience. She was tired, a little distracted, thinking about rent that was due in 5 days. Near the window sat an older woman dressed simply in a pale gray coat. She had ordered tea and a small bowl of soup. Nothing unusual about that. People came alone all the time. The woman's name was Margaret. She ate slowly, not because she was fragile, but because she seemed to be thinking. When she finished, she placed both hands on the table and stood up carefully. Her chair leg caught slightly against the edge of the rug. It happened quickly, a slip, a shift of balance, the sound of a body hitting polished floor. The restaurant did not erupt into cruel laughter. It reacted the way real places do. There was a sharp intake of breath from a nearby table. Someone said, "Oh." A fork clattered. One man half rose from his seat but hesitated, unsure if he would only be in the way. Margaret lay stunned for a second, embarrassed more than hurt. Her purse had spilled open. A compact mirror slid across the floor. Emily saw it from across the room. For a brief second, just a second, she looked toward the kitchen. They were short-staffed. Table 12 was waiting on dessert. Her manager disliked delays. Then she exhaled and walked quickly toward Margaret. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked, kneeling beside her. Margaret blinked, trying to collect herself. Yes, I think so. Just foolish." "You're not foolish," Emily said quietly. "Let's take a second." A younger woman from a nearby table stepped forward and handed Emily the fallen compact. Another guest moved the chair aside so there was space. It wasn't a room full of villains. It was a room full of people unsure how involved to be. Emily helped Margaret sit up slowly. "Anywhere sharp?" Emily asked. "Back, hip?" Margaret tested her weight carefully. "Only my pride," she said, but this time it wasn't poetic. It was uncomfortable honesty. Emily gave a small, tired smile. "That heals faster than bones." She helped her into the chair. Someone brought water without being asked. Across the room, the manager, Mr. Harris, was already walking over, not angry, but alert. "Do we need an ambulance?" he asked professionally. Margaret shook her head. "No, please, that would be worse than the fall." Mr. Harris crouched slightly. "If you feel dizzy later, we insist. Liability aside, we care about our guests." It wasn't cruelty. It was policy mixed with concern. Emily noticed Margaret's hands were still trembling. "Would you like to sit a few minutes?" she asked gently. Margaret nodded. The room slowly returned to its previous rhythm. Conversations resumed, though softer for a moment. Emily stayed nearby longer than she technically should have. "You work hard," Margaret observed after a moment. Emily let out a small breath. "I try to." "Do you like it?" The question caught her off guard. "It pays," Emily answered honestly. Margaret studied her, not judging, just noticing. "You came quickly," Margaret said. "You hesitated first." Emily blinked. "You saw that?" "I've lived long enough to recognize calculation," Margaret replied. "You were deciding whether you were allowed to care." That landed heavier than expected. Emily didn't answer immediately. "My staff are overworked," Mr. Harris called from across the room, not unkindly. "Emily, when you can." "I should get back," Emily said. Margaret reached lightly for her wrist. "Thank you for choosing to step forward." There was no dramatic music. No sudden shift in atmosphere. Just two women looking at each other. About 10 minutes later, a car pulled up outside, and not flashy, just expensive in the understated way money often is. A man in his 40s stepped out, scanning the restaurant through the glass. He entered quickly. "Mom?" Margaret's expression softened. "Daniel." There was relief in his voice. Real concern, not performative. "I got your message. You said you slipped." "I did," she replied calmly. "And I survived." Daniel crouched slightly beside her. "Are you hurt?" "No." His eyes moved to Emily, who stood a step back. "She helped," Margaret said. Daniel stood and extended his hand. "Thank you." It was firm, direct, not grand. "You don't need to thank me," Emily replied. "Anyone would have." Daniel glanced briefly around the room. "Not always." Mr. Harris approached, posture professional. "We've documented the incident," he said carefully. "And we're reviewing the rug placement." Daniel nodded. "I appreciate that." There was no dramatic confrontation, no speech about dignity, no public shaming, just adults handling something uncomfortable. As Daniel helped his mother gather her things, Margaret looked at Emily again. "Do you always look that tired?" she asked softly. Emily almost laughed. "Lately, yes." Daniel heard it. "What do you want to do?" he asked unexpectedly. Emily frowned slightly. "Tonight? Finish my shift." "No," he said. "In general." It wasn't a fairy godfather question. It was quiet curiosity. Emily hesitated. "I used to study community health," she admitted. Had to pause, tuition. Daniel absorbed that without expression. Margaret squeezed his arm lightly. A silent conversation passed between them. Daniel reached into his coat, not for a checkbook, not for a dramatic card, but for his phone. "Which college?" he asked. Emily told him. He nodded once. "I serve on their board." The statement wasn't boastful, just factual. Emily stiffened slightly. Here it comes, she thought. The movie moment. But it didn't. He didn't offer her a job. He didn't promise funding. He didn't announce anything to the room. Instead, he said, "They have a returning student grant program. Hard to find unless someone points you to it." He typed briefly. "I've emailed the admissions director to expect your inquiry. No guarantees. But now your application won't get lost in a pile." Emily stared at him. "That's more than enough," she said carefully. Margaret smiled faintly. "Opportunity is better than rescue." Daniel helped his mother to her feet. As they walked toward the door, Margaret paused. "You didn't help me because of him," she said quietly. "No," Emily replied. "Good." And then they left. The restaurant didn't clap. No one avoided eye contact in shame. Life resumed, because that's what life does. But something subtle had shifted inside Emily. Not because a wealthy man had noticed her, but because Margaret had noticed her hesitation. "You were deciding whether you were allowed to care." That sentence followed her through the rest of her shift. When she clocked out, she didn't feel magically transformed. She still had rent due. Her feet still hurt. But she opened her phone in the locker room and searched for the returning student grant Daniel had mentioned. It existed. It had been there for 3 years. She had never known. 2 months later, she sat in a small admissions office, answering questions she once believed were no longer meant for her. She was not handed anything. She filled out forms. She wrote essays at midnight after work. She was waitlisted, then accepted. Partial funding, not full enough to try. On her last week at the restaurant, not because she was rescued, but because she chose to step into something difficult, Margaret returned alone. No fall this time. Just tea. "You look different," Margaret observed. "Terrified," Emily admitted. "Good," Margaret said. "That means you're growing." Emily hesitated. "Why did you really ask me that night what I wanted?" Margaret looked out the window before answering. "Because I've watched people live entire lives waiting to be chosen. I wanted to see if you would choose yourself." Emily swallowed. Daniel never offered her a job. He never called in more favors. He simply cleared a path that had already existed. The rest, the effort, the risk, the uncertainty, belonged to her. As Margaret stood to leave, she did so steadily this time. Emily noticed. "Careful of the rug," she said lightly. Margaret smiled. "I am." And this time, when Emily watched her walk out, she did not feel like a heroine in a fairy tale. She felt like a woman who had paused for a moment, and then decided to step forward. Not because kindness would reward her, but because she was no longer asking permission to care or to grow.